The warm glow of the dinner table was a stark and welcome contrast to the cold, sterile lights of the safe houses and hotel rooms that had defined their lives for weeks. Peter, his small frame buzzing with the day's excitement and a second helping of dessert, finally succumbed to his exhaustion, his head drooping until it came to rest softly on Henry's arm. A soft, contented sigh escaped Teresa's lips as she watched them. "He fought sleep for an hour just to stay near you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He's afraid you'll disappear if he closes his eyes." Henry didn't move, unwilling to disturb the boy's peaceful slumber. He looked from Peter's trusting face to Teresa's luminous eyes, and the magnitude of the moment settled upon him, more profound than any corporate takeover or press conference. This was it. This was the life he had almost missed. "I'm not going anywhere, Teresa," he said, his voice a low, resonant promise in the quiet room. "Not ever again." He carefully shifted, gathering Peter into his arms. The boy was a warm, trusting weight against his chest, smelling of soap and childhood. Henry carried him down the hall to his small bedroom, Teresa following close behind. She turned down the covers on the bed adorned with cartoon trucks, and Henry laid him down with a tenderness that surprised even himself. Peter murmured something incoherent, his fingers clutching at Henry's sleeve for a moment before relaxing. His yellow tractor held securely under one arm. They stood side by side in the dim light, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. It was Teresa who moved first, her hand finding Henry's. Her touch was electric, a simple connection that spoke of shared fear, shared survival, and a dawning, shared future. She led him back into the living room, but the atmosphere had shifted. The casual comfort of dinner was now charged with a new, potent intimacy. The city lights glittered like scattered diamonds beyond the windows, a world away from the quiet sanctuary they had built within these walls. "You gave us our lives back, Henry," Teresa began, her voice barely above a whisper as she turned to face him. "You walked into a storm for us, a storm you didn't have to." Henry reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray tear from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, yet it seemed to erase the last of the distance between them. "I didn't walk into a storm, Teresa," he corrected her softly, his gaze holding hers. "I walked into the only thing that finally made sense. You and Peter, you weren't a duty. You were the answer to a question I'd been asking my whole life without even knowing it." His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a brief, heart-stopping second. The luxury he was accustomed to was defined by marble and gold. But this palpable connection, this trust offered so freely after so much pain, was the purest form of wealth he had ever known. When she opened her eyes again, they were clear and certain, all apprehension finally gone, replaced by a hope so bright it stole his breath. "Then stay," she breathed, the words an invitation and a vow. "This is your home now." He needed no further invitation. The space between them vanished as he drew her into his arms, not with the desperation of their previous embraces born of fear, but with the profound certainty of a promise finally kept. His lips found hers, and the world, with all its dangers and its glittering lights, fell completely away. It was not a kiss of passion alone, though that coursed through them like a live wire. It was a kiss of homecoming. It tasted of tears shed and fears conquered, of lonely nights giving way to a shared dawn. Her hands came up to frame his face, her touch both tender and possessive, as if she too needed the physical proof that he was real, that he was here, that he was hers. When they finally parted, breathless and trembling, their foreheads rested together. The silence of the house was no longer empty but filled with the thunderous, joyful beating of their hearts. "Teresa," he whispered her name like a prayer, a vow, a benediction. She smiled, a radiant, breathtaking sight that reached deep into the wounded places of his soul and healed them. "Henry," she answered, her voice steady now, sure. "Welcome home." He swept her into his arms again, this time lifting her effortlessly, and she buried her laughter in the fine wool of his suit jacket. He carried her, not to the sterile guest room, but to her own bedroom, where the faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air. He laid her down on the simple quilt as if she were the most precious, fragile treasure. And in that moment, she was. The moon, a pale silver coin, cast a path of light across the floor, illuminating the quiet luxury of this new beginning. Here, there were no bodyguards lurking in the hall, no whispered updates from agents on a secure line. There was only the sound of their breathing synchronizing, the rustle of clothing discarded not in haste, but with a reverent slowness that cherished every new discovery. His hands, which had signed billion-dollar deals and held evidence that toppled empires, now learned the exquisite geography of her. They traced the delicate line of her collarbone, the gentle curve of her waist, the strength in her back that had carried such an unbearable weight. Each touch was a silent promise, a seal upon the vow he had made, and she, in turn, rediscovered her own strength not as a shield against the world, but as a gift to offer him. She mapped the broad plains of his shoulders, the faint scars of a life lived before her, the steady, powerful beat of his heart beneath her palm. He was her fortress, her sanctuary, and she was his reason for being. Later, wrapped in the warmth of each other and the soft cotton sheets, she lay with her head on his chest, listening to the strong, steady rhythm that would now be the soundtrack of her life. His fingers were lazily tracing patterns on her bare arm. "The press is calling you a hero," she murmured, her voice drowsy with contentment. He kissed the top of her head, his breath stirring her hair. "I don't care about the press," he said, his voice a low rumble in his chest. "The only title I want is the one Peter gave me." He paused, letting the significance of the word hang in the dark, beautiful room. "Dad." The word hung in the air, a sacred, final piece settling into the puzzle of their lives. That it was not a role he had ever envisioned for himself, yet now it felt more intrinsic than any title on a business card, more powerful than any boardroom victory. He felt Teresa's smile against his skin, a silent seal of approval on this, the most important appointment of his life. The first light of dawn was a pale, peach-colored brushstroke against the horizon when the sound of small, padding footsteps broke the silence. The bedroom door, left slightly ajar, creaked open further. There stood Peter, his hair tousled from sleep, his faithful yellow tractor clutched in one hand, his eyes wide and unsure. The remnants of old fears, the ghost of waking up alone, flickered in his expression. Before Henry could even move, Teresa began to stir, but he gently stilled her with a touch. This was his to answer. This was his promise to keep. He shifted carefully, not wanting to startle the boy. "Peter?" he whispered into the soft gloom. "What is it, son?" The term of endearment, offered so naturally, seemed to dissolve the last of Peter's apprehension. "I had a dream," the little boy whispered, his voice small. "I got scared." Henry held out his arm, an invitation. "Come here." Peter didn't hesitate. He scurried across the room and climbed onto the large bed, worming his way under the covers between them, a warm, small body radiating trust. He settled with his back pressed against Henry's side, his head finding a comfortable spot on the pillow they now shared. With a sigh of profound contentment, he was asleep again in moments, his tractor held securely on his chest. Teresa turned to face them, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears in the dim light. She reached out, her hand resting first on Peter's sleeping form, then linking her fingers with Henry's over their son. No palace, no penthouse, no luxury resort had ever offered a moment of such perfect, unassailable peace. They were a fortress of three, and Henry, the man who had once commanded empires of steel and glass, knew he had finally found his kingdom. The weeks that followed were a study in beautiful, ordinary chaos. Henry's world, once defined by board meetings and international flights, now revolved around school runs and grocery lists. He traded his custom-tailored suits for soft sweaters, his polished Oxfords for sneakers. He didn't mind getting muddy in the park. He learned the intricate lore of Peter's favorite cartoons over bowls of sugary cereal in the morning. He sat on the floor for hours, helping to build elaborate, rickety train tracks that snaked through the entire living room, his strategic mind now devoted to ensuring the bridge over the Pillow Mountain didn't collapse. He read bedtime stories, doing all the voices, his deep, resonant voice bringing pirates and dinosaurs to life until Peter's eyelids grew heavy. And Teresa, watching Henry with her son, was a daily renewal of her heart. She saw the stern, imposing businessman get utterly bested in a tickle fight, heard his rich laughter echo through their small home, a sound that was becoming as familiar and cherished as her own heartbeat. He was not trying to replace Joseph. He was building something new upon the foundation of love Joseph had left behind, honoring the past while fiercely protecting their future. One afternoon, Henry returned from a meeting with his lawyers and the federal prosecutors, a meeting he now scheduled strictly between drop-off and pick-up times. He found Teresa in the garden, planting bright annuals in a small bed. She looked up, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek with the back of her glove, and the sight of her, so vibrant and grounded, still stole the air from his lungs. "The last of the assets have been frozen," he said, sitting on the porch step beside her. "Larkin's company is being dissolved. The funds they can recover will be returned to the city." He spoke quietly, the shadow of the past few months briefly darkening the sunny day. Teresa sat back on her heels, looking at him. "And Charles? August?" She rarely said the names anymore, but they were the final ghosts that needed laying to rest. "Interpol found them hiding in a villa in Montenegro," Henry said, a hard, satisfied edge in his tone. "They were extradited this morning. They'll stand trial here with all the evidence. It's over, Teresa. Truly over." A single tear traced a clean path through the dirt on her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of finality. The long, harrowing chapter was closed. She pulled off her gloves and came to sit beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," he said, turning to her and cupping her face. His thumb gently erased the tears trail. "Thank you for trusting me, for letting me in." That evening, after Peter was asleep, Henry led Teresa outside into their small backyard. The air was warm, carrying the scent of the flowers she had planted. He'd set 2 chairs side by side, and for a while, they just sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars pepper the vast, dark sky. "I sold the company today," he said, his voice calm. "The entire holding, to a consortium I trust. They'll run it well." Teresa turned to him, her eyes wide with shock. "Henry, your life's work." "It was a shell," he said, his gaze fixed on her. "A beautifully appointed, incredibly profitable shell. Kept me busy. It never made me feel." He searched for the word, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Like this." He gestured around them, at the modest garden, the small house, the universe contained within it. "This is my life's work now. You, Peter. This." He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a ring box from a famous jeweler. Instead, he held a simple, perfect diamond solitaire set on a platinum band. It was elegant, timeless, and spoke of a quiet confidence that needed no ostentation. "Teresa," he began, his voice thick with an emotion so powerful it made her own heart ache with joy. "I spent a lifetime building monuments to success that felt empty. You and Peter built a home out of courage and love, and it is the only place I have ever felt successful. Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life being your husband and Peter's father. Let me build a life with you, not in the spotlight, but here, in the beautiful, ordinary light of day." Tears streamed freely down her face now, but she was smiling, a radiant, breathtaking smile that outshone the diamond in his hand. She didn't need to think or question or hesitate. Their story had already been written in moments of incredible bravery and profound peace. "Yes," she breathed, the word a joyful sob. "1,000 times, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. It wasn't a shackle or a contract. It was a symbol, a circle with no beginning and no end, just like the love that had saved them all. He kissed her then, under the infinite sky, a man who had finally found his true fortune, not in a bank vault, but in the arms of a brave woman and the trusting heart of a little boy who had called him Dad. Their future, once a desperate hope, now stretched before them, luminous and safe, a promise waiting to be lived, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. The yes that had slipped from Teresa's lips was more than an answer. It was a key turning in a long-locked door, opening onto a vista of a future so bright and real it was almost dizzying. The kiss that followed was a seal upon that future. A slow, deep communion that tasted of joy and the sweet night air. When they finally parted, her left hand rested against his chest, the new weight of the ring on her finger feeling not strange, but profoundly correct, as if a missing part of her had been returned. He led her back inside, their fingers intertwined, the silence between them now a language of its own. They checked on Peter, sleeping the deep, untroubled sleep of a child who knows he is utterly safe, his tractor guardian tucked under his arm. Standing there, watching their son, the world felt perfectly ordered. The next morning, the sunlight streaming into the kitchen felt different. It was the first morning of their engagement, a secret jewel they carried between them. Peter, crunching on his cereal, was too engrossed in explaining the complex engine of his tractor to notice the new, soft light in his mother's eyes or the way Henry's hand lingered on her lower back as he passed her the coffee. It was Henry who broke the news, his voice calm and warm. "Peter," he said, kneeling beside the boy's chair so they were eye level. "I asked your mom a very important question last night." Peter stopped, a spoonful of cereal halfway to his mouth, his little face instantly serious. "About the bad men? Are they gone for real?" Henry's heart clenched. "Yes, son, they're gone for real." But this was a different question. He glanced at Teresa, who nodded, her smile trembling at the edges. "I asked her if I could be your dad forever, not just pretend but really, truly your dad. And if I could be her husband." Peter's eyes grew round. He looked from Henry's earnest face to his mother's tearful, happy one. The concept processed in his young mind, not as a legal or social contract, but in the simple, profound terms of a child. "You mean you'll stay? Every night? And we'll always be a family?" "Always," Henry vowed, his voice thick. A brilliant, sunbeam-like smile exploded across Peter's face. He launched himself from the chair and into Henry's arms, wrapping his small limbs around his neck in a stranglehold of pure joy. "Yes," he shouted, the sound echoing in the cozy kitchen. "We'll be a family. A real one." He pulled back, his expression turning suddenly, comically practical. "Does this mean I have to call you Dad now? Not just Dad Henry?" Henry laughed, a rich, free sound that filled the room. "You can call me whatever you like, buddy." Peter considered this for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Okay, Dad." The word, offered so freely and finally, was a gift more valuable than any Henry had ever received. He hugged the boy tightly, meeting Teresa's gaze over his shoulder. Her hands were pressed to her mouth, tears of happiness streaming down her face. Their little family was officially, irrevocably, complete. The wedding was not a society event. It was held in the same small, sun-dappled garden where he had proposed 2 weeks later. There were no hundreds of guests, no paparazzi, no opulent displays of wealth. There was only a white arch draped with the same flowers Teresa had planted, a local judge, and a handful of truly essential people. A fiercely proud Special Agent Paul Roberts, standing as Henry's best man, and a few of Teresa's friends from her old life, who looked at Henry not as a billionaire, but as the man who had brought the light back into their friends' eyes. Peter was the ring-bearer, marching down the makeshift aisle with grave importance, a tiny velvet pillow in his hands bearing 2 simple platinum bands. He stood between them as they said their vows, a living testament to the journey that had brought them to this moment. Henry's voice never wavered as he looked into Teresa's eyes. "I promise to honor the past that made you, to cherish the present I have with you, and to build a future worthy of you and our son. I will be your shelter, your comfort, and your safest place, for all the days of my life." When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, and Henry kissed his bride, it was Peter's cheer that rang out the loudest, pure and unbridled. The reception was a picnic on the grass. There was no multi-tiered cake, but a simple lemon confection from a local bakery, which Peter enthusiastically helped them cut. As the afternoon wore on, Agent Roberts, looking out of place but deeply content in a relaxed suit, clinked his glass of iced tea for a toast. "I've seen a lot in my line of work," he began, his sharp eyes softening as he looked at the new family. "A lot of bad. But what I witnessed here, it's the good we fight for. Henry, you had everything and you risked it all for what truly matters. Teresa, your strength is the stuff of legends. And you, kiddo," he said, nodding to Peter, who was listening intently, "you're the bravest 5-year-old I've ever met. This isn't an ending. It's the beginning of the best part." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of gold and violet, Henry and Teresa stole a moment away, sitting on the porch steps as they had the night he proposed. Peter was showing a fascinated Agent Roberts the intricate mechanics of his yellow tractor. "It feels like a dream," Teresa murmured, her head on his shoulder, her left hand, now adorned with both her simple gold band from Joseph and her new engagement and wedding rings, laced with his. "A beautiful, peaceful dream." "It's not a dream," Henry said, kissing her hair. "It's our life." He paused, looking out at their son, their protector, their home. "And it's only just begun." The last of the sunlight glinted off Peter's toy tractor, a tiny speck of gold in the gathering dusk, a perfect symbol of a past lovingly remembered and a future infinitely, wonderfully bright. The long shadows of fear were gone, replaced by the enduring light of a love that had conquered everything. They were no longer a man, a widow, and a son. They were a family, and their story finally was their own to write. The golden haze of the wedding day settled into the deep, contented rhythm of ordinary life. The house, once a temporary shelter, now hummed with the permanent music of their existence. Henry's previous life, a collection of sprawling, silent penthouses and hotels, faded into a monochrome memory compared to the vibrant, sometimes chaotic, symphony of his new world. He discovered a profound luxury in the mundane. The scent of Teresa's shampoo on his pillow, the scattered trail of Peter's toys across the living room rug, the shared, sleepy silence over the morning paper. He kept his promise. The corporate titan was retired. In his place was a man who learned to pack a school lunch with the same focused intensity he once reserved for merger acquisitions, ensuring the apple slices were never bruised and the sandwich crusts were cut off just the way Peter liked. His vast wealth was no longer a tool for expansion but a shield for their serenity, quietly funding trusts, securing their future, and donating anonymously to causes that protected families like theirs had once been, vulnerable and unheard. One crisp autumn afternoon, Henry was on the floor of the living room, deeply engaged in a complex negotiation with a fleet of toy trucks. Peter, the foreman of the operation, was directing the placement of a new, gleaming red fire engine Henry had brought home. "It needs to go next to the police car, Dad," Peter instructed, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "They have to work together, like you and Agent Paul." Henry smiled, moving the fire engine into its designated spot. "Of course, teamwork." Teresa watched them from the doorway, her heart feeling too large for her chest. She held a mug of tea in her hands, its warmth a small comfort against the lingering chill of a memory she needed to share. She had waited for this moment, for the solidity of their new life to be strong enough to support the weight of the past. "Henry," she said softly, "when you have a minute?" He heard the subtle shift in her tone immediately. He looked up, his playful expression softening into one of attentive concern. "Everything all right?" "Yes," she said, offering a reassuring smile. "More than all right. There's something I'd like to show you. Something of Joseph's." Peter, sensing the change in atmosphere, looked up. "Daddy's things?" Teresa nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. The special box." Henry rose from the floor, his movements deliberate and calm. He followed her down the hall to their bedroom, Peter trailing behind, holding onto the hem of Henry's sweater. From the top shelf of her closet, Teresa brought down a simple, worn cedar box. It smelled of memory and careful preservation. She sat on the edge of the bed, and Henry sat beside her, his thigh brushing hers. Peter climbed up to sit on his other side, his small body pressed close. Teresa lifted the lid. Inside wasn't a collection of sorrow, but an archive of a life well lived. There were photographs of a younger, smiling Joseph with his arm around a beaming Teresa on their wedding day. There were tiny baby booties, a lock of fine, baby hair tied with a ribbon, and Peter's first drawing, a chaotic swirl of crayon that Joseph had labeled "My son," the artist, in neat block letters. Teresa's fingers trembled slightly as she moved aside these treasures and pulled out a thick, marbled composition notebook. "He was a dreamer, my Joseph," she said, her voice thick with love, not grief. "He didn't just see problems, he saw solutions, better ways to build, stronger materials, safer designs." She handed the notebook to Henry. This was his ideas, his hopes for the future. He was so excited about the new composite material he'd sketched here. He said it would revolutionize affordable housing. Henry took the book as if it were a holy text. He opened it carefully. The pages were filled with Joseph's precise engineer's handwriting, complex equations, and beautifully detailed sketches of structures and materials. It was the mind of a brilliant, good man laid bare. This was the man Henry had only known as a victim, a name, a story of courage. Here he was a creator. "The men who threatened him," Teresa continued, her gaze fixed on the notebook in Henry's hands, "they didn't just want to hide their theft. They wanted this." He'd refused to let them patent his designs under their company name. He said his work was for the public good, not for their private greed. That's why they were so desperate. Henry looked from the beautiful, hopeful designs to Teresa's face, seeing the pain of that betrayal still fresh in her eyes. He understood then that Joseph's sacrifice was twofold. He had died not only to expose corruption but to protect his integrity, to keep his genius from being perverted by vile men. A resolve, calm and absolute, settled within him. He closed the notebook and held it gently. "Teresa," he said, his voice low and sure, "this isn't a relic. This is a blueprint." He looked at Peter, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. "Your father was a brilliant man, Peter, a hero, and his work isn't finished." He turned back to Teresa, his eyes alight with a new purpose, one that seamlessly wove together the threads of their pasts and their future. "Let me finish it for him. Let me build what he dreamed of, not for profit, for people, in his name." Teresa's tears finally fell then, but they were tears of healing, of a wound finally being cleansed and dressed. She nodded, unable to speak, and leaned into him, her head finding its home on his shoulder. Peter wiggled in between them, completing the circle. That night, after Peter was asleep, Henry sat at his desk, Joseph's notebook open before him. He wasn't an engineer, but he was a builder of a different kind. He picked up his phone and made a call, not to a corporate underling, but to the head of the most prestigious engineering university in the country, a man who owed Henry a favor. "James," Henry said, his voice echoing softly in the quiet study. "I have a project for you, a legacy project. I need your best materials people, your sharpest structural minds. I want to fund a research grant, a full-scale development initiative. The goal is to take a revolutionary composite design and make it a reality, to build safer, stronger, affordable communities." He paused, his fingers tracing Joseph's signature on a complex schematic. "We're going to call it the Sanders Foundation." He could almost feel Joseph's presence in the room, not as a ghost of the past, but as a partner in the future. Henry Lancaster, the billionaire who had walked away from everything, had found his greatest venture yet. Not in building an empire, but in honoring a legacy, healing his family, and using his power to bring a good man's beautiful dream to life. The story of Joseph Sanders would not end with a tragedy. It would be written in the foundations of new homes, in the lives of families living safely within walls born from his courage and finished by the love of the family he left behind. The Sanders Foundation became Henry's new life's work, a sacred trust that merged his formidable acumen with Joseph's visionary brilliance. His study, once a place of cold corporate strategy, was transformed. Blueprints and material samples now shared space with financial reports. The marbled composition notebook, carefully preserved under glass, was the heart of the room, a constant reminder of the man whose legacy they were building. He assembled a team of the brightest, most idealistic engineers he could find, young minds untainted by cynicism, who looked at Joseph's sketches not as outdated concepts, but as inspired prophecy. He became not just their benefactor, but their student, listening intently as they explained the nuances of polymer composites and tensile strength. His questions sharp, his purpose sharper. Teresa was his partner in it all. She had an intuitive understanding of Joseph's thought process, a sense of what he would have prioritized. He always talked about the families, she'd say, pointing to a design for a community center. He said a strong beam can hold up a roof, but a strong community can hold up a soul. Her insights became the moral compass of the foundation, ensuring that every decision, no matter how technical, served the human heart of Joseph's dream. One evening, Henry returned home late from the foundation's new offices, the scent of cold air and fresh ink on blueprints clinging to his coat. He found Teresa not in the living room, but in Peter's room, sitting on the edge of his bed. Peter was asleep, but clutched in his hand was not his yellow tractor, but a photograph of Joseph in his hard hat, smiling proudly. Teresa was crying, not with the healing tears of before, but with a quiet, raw sorrow Henry hadn't seen in months. The sight felt like a physical blow. "Teresa?" he whispered, crossing the room instantly and kneeling before her. He took her hands, which were cold. "What is it, my love?" She shook her head, unable to speak for a moment, gesturing weakly at the photograph. "It's just some days," she finally managed, her voice a broken thread. "Some days the missing him is so physical. Feels like a piece of me is still gone. And I look at Peter, and he's so happy. He loves you so much. And I feel so guilty for being so happy with you when Joseph." Her sentence fractured into a sob. The unspoken fear that had lingered in the deepest, most shadowed corner of her heart was finally out. That her newfound joy was a betrayal of her first love. Henry didn't flinch. He didn't offer hollow platitudes. He simply gathered her into his arms, holding her as she trembled, letting the storm of her grief break against him. He led her gently from Peter's room and into their own, sitting with her on the same bed where they had forged their new life together. "Listen to me," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the tempest of her emotions. He cupped her face, forcing her tear-filled eyes to meet his. "What you feel for Joseph, that love, it is not a room you have to leave and lock behind you. It's a foundation." He emphasized the word, the name of their shared mission. "It's the strong, beautiful foundation upon which we are building everything." He brushed her tears away with his thumbs. "He is a part of you, Teresa, and because he is a part of you, I love him too. I am grateful to him, for his courage, for his integrity, for the incredible son he gave you, for the wonderful woman he loved so well that she still knows how to love with her whole heart." His words were a balm, seeping into the raw, guilty wound. Loving me doesn't erase him. It honors him. It proves that the goodness he saw in the world, the goodness he was real and strong enough to survive even the worst darkness. Our happiness is his victory, Teresa, not his betrayal. He held her until her tears subsided, until the tension left her body and she leaned against him, spent but peaceful. The ghost had been acknowledged, invited to sit with them, and in doing so, it had lost its power to haunt. "Thank you," she whispered into his chest, "for understanding. Always," he vowed. The next morning, Henry had a new addition to his study. Next to Joseph's notebook, he placed the photograph of Joseph that Peter had been holding. It was no longer a symbol of absence, but a presence. Partner. A reminder of the love that had made their own love possible. Weeks turned into months. The foundation's first project broke ground on the outskirts of the city, a development of 20 affordable homes, utilizing Joseph's composite material, which was proving to be everything he'd dreamed. Stronger, cheaper, and more energy efficient. The day of the groundbreaking ceremony was bright and cold. Henry, Teresa, and Peter stood together, wearing hard hats bearing the foundation's logo, a simple, elegant intertwining of an S and an L. When it was Henry's turn to speak, He didn't talk about profit margins or innovation. He stood at the podium, his hand resting on Joseph's notebook. "We are not just building houses today," he said, his voice carrying clearly over the crowd of engineers, future homeowners, and press. "We are building homes, and we are building them on the principles of a man who believed that integrity was the strongest material of all. A man named Joseph Sanders." He looked at Teresa, who stood tall and proud, her hand in Peter's. His dream was not to make a fortune, but to make a difference, to keep families safe and warm. That dream was almost stolen. But love is a force more powerful than greed. Love protects dreams. And today, love is bringing this one to life. He stepped aside, and to the crowd's surprise, he gestured not to a politician or a CEO, but to Peter. "The honor of the first turn of the soil belongs to the son of the man who imagined all of this." Peter, beaming with a pride that eclipsed any nervousness, stepped forward. Henry helped him grip the handle of a miniature, gold-painted shovel. Together, father and son, they turned the first piece of earth. The cameras flashed, capturing not just a photo opportunity, but a testament to a promise kept, a legacy honored, and a family that had woven its past and future into something unbreakably strong. As the machinery roared to life behind them, Henry picked Peter up, holding him close. Teresa slipped her arm through his, resting her head on his shoulder. They stood there, a united front against the cold wind, watching the future being built, not just from concrete and composite, but from courage, memory, and a love that had truly conquered all. Their story was no longer about survival. It was about legacy, and it was more beautiful than any of them could have ever imagined. The roar of the earth movers became the soundtrack of their new purpose. The Sanders Lancaster home, once a quiet haven, now often buzzed with the energy of the foundation's work. Henry's study was a command center, but it was a command center filled with life. Peter would often do his homework at a small desk Henry had brought in for him, sketching his own blueprints for fantastical treehouses while his father reviewed genuine ones. Teresa would bring in tea, her eye often catching a detail on a plan, a memory of Joseph's passion sparking a suggestion that would leave the engineers nodding in thoughtful agreement. They were a unit, a trinity of purpose. The profound peace they had fought for was no longer a fragile thing to be protected, but a strong, deep well from which they drew to pour into the world. It was on a rainy Sunday afternoon, with the three of them curled up on the large sofa, Henry reading financial briefings, Teresa with a novel, and Peter meticulously coloring a picture of a construction site, that the boy looked up, his small face serious. "Dad," Peter asked, his crayon hovering mid-air, "when the new houses are done, will kids who were scared, like me and Mom were, get to live in them? And will they be safe?" The question, so innocent and yet so deeply insightful, hung in the air. Henry put down his papers. Teresa marked her page and set her book aside. They both looked at their son, seeing not just a child, but the living, breathing heart of their entire mission. "Yes, son," Henry said, his voice gentle. "That's the whole idea." Peter considered this, his brow furrowed in a way that was so reminiscent of Joseph's thoughtful expression in his photographs. "But how will they know?" he pressed. "How will they know that the house is a safe place? That the bad things are over?" Teresa reached out, smoothing his hair. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Our house is safe because you and Dad are here," Peter explained with simple, childlike logic. "But what if the kids moving in are still a little scared? Their houses need to know how to be safe too." Henry felt a lump form in his throat. Out of the mouths of babes. Peter had pinpointed the one element no blueprint could draft, no composite material could provide: the soul of a home. He looked at Teresa, and he saw the same awe and realization dawning in her eyes. The foundation's work was vital, but it was addressing the past, rectifying a wrong. Peter was asking them to heal the future. An idea, vast and terrifying and utterly perfect, began to crystallize in Henry's mind. It was bigger than a development. It was a monument. He stood up, pacing slowly to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "Peter," he said, turning back to them, his eyes alight with a new, fierce vision. What if the houses weren't the only thing we built? Teresa and Peter watched him, captivated. What if we built a place just for those kids? He continued, his voice gaining momentum. A place that isn't a house, but feels like one. A place where they could go to remember that it's okay to play again. Where they could tell their stories if they wanted to, or just be quiet and remember how to feel safe. He looked at Teresa. A community center, but not just any center. A sanctuary. Joseph's sanctuary. Teresa's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes glistening. Henry, it would be the heart of the development, he said, crossing the room to kneel before them both, taking their hands. A place for after-school programs, for counseling, for families to gather. A place built with light and gardens and joy. A place that actively knows how to be safe because we will design it that way. For the children who, like you, Peter, have seen too much. Peter's eyes were wide with wonder. With a playground? He asked, his voice full of hope. With the best playground anyone has ever seen, Henry vowed. And a room for drawing. And a library with every adventure story ever written. The project consumed them with a new, even more profound fervor. The Sanders Foundation's mission expanded. Henry leveraged every connection, not for profit, but for purpose. He brought in world-renowned architects specializing in trauma-informed design, child psychologists, and landscape artists. The community center, Joseph's Sanctuary, became the crown jewel of the development, its budget dwarfing that of the houses themselves, because Henry now understood that building a structure was simple, but building a feeling of safety was priceless. The official opening of the Sanders Foundation community was a day of brilliant sunshine. The 20 neat, beautiful houses stood proud, but it was the stunning, light-filled structure of Joseph's Sanctuary at the center that drew everyone's eye. Its walls were made of glass and warm wood, and it seemed to welcome the sunlight itself. There were speeches from politicians and community leaders, but the crowd was waiting for Henry. He stood at the podium, Teresa beside him, Peter holding onto his hand. Today is not an ending, Henry said, his voice strong and clear. It is a beginning. These homes represent a future built on integrity. But this, he said, gesturing to the magnificent sanctuary behind him, this represents a future built on healing. It is named for a man of courage, but it is built for the courage of children. It is a promise that fear does not get the last word, that joy is a right, that safety is a place you can come to, not just a place you live. He looked down at Peter. This was my son's idea. He taught me that a house is made of walls and beams, but a home is made of love and courage. And that is what we offer here today. He then did something that would be talked about for years. He stepped away from the podium, picked up a large, old-fashioned brass key, and handed it not to a mayor or a dignitary, but to Peter. Peter, he said, his voice soft but carrying in the hushed silence. You are the heart of this. Will you do the honors? With a deep breath of importance, Peter took the heavy key. Holding Henry's hand for balance, he inserted it into the lock of the grand wooden doors. With a turn and a loud, satisfying click, he pushed the doors open. The first to run inside were not the adults, but a group of children from the new families, their laughter echoing through the sun-drenched, colorful space, bouncing through the reading nooks and rushing out to the magnificent playground beyond. Henry, Teresa, and Peter stood arm in arm, watching them. They saw a little girl tentatively touch a slide, then, with a burst of bravery, climb to the top and swoosh down with a shriek of delight. They saw a boy quietly examining a book in a beanbag chair, a look of peaceful concentration on his face. Teresa squeezed Henry's arm, her heart too full for words. The ghost of fear was gone, not just for them, but exorcised from this place, replaced by the radiant, resilient spirit of hope. Peter looked up at them, his face illuminated with a happiness so pure it was almost blinding. They're not scared anymore, he whispered. Henry looked from the joyful children to the face of the son who had taught him everything, to the wife who was his strength and his home. He had set out to protect one family and had ended up building a sanctuary for many. He had inherited a legacy of courage and was passing on a legacy of love. He knelt and pulled Peter into a tight embrace, then reached for Teresa, drawing them both in. They were surrounded by the sounds of laughter and the beginning of new stories. "No, son," Henry murmured into Peter's hair, his voice thick with a joy so profound it felt like a new element, stronger than any composite. "They're not, and neither are we." Their own story was forever intertwined with those of the families moving into the homes, with the children finding safety in the sanctuary. It was a story that would continue to be told, not as a tragedy, but as a testament. A living, breathing testament to the truth that love could indeed build a world. And their world, finally, was complete. The three of them stood there, a single silhouette against the vibrant backdrop of the sanctuary they had built, their embrace a silent vow in the golden light of the afternoon. The laughter of children was the music that played their story out, a symphony of resilience and hope where fear once held the baton. Henry Lancaster, the man who had once commanded empires of steel and glass, now held his entire world in his arms. He had not just found a family, he had helped build a community. He had not just honored a legacy, he had given it a beating heart and a future. The luxurious quiet of his old life was a distant memory, forever replaced by the rich, beautiful noise of a purpose fulfilled. Teresa, her head resting against his shoulder, felt the last delicate thread of past sorrow dissolve, woven now into a tapestry of strength and love. She was no longer a widow defined by loss, but a woman rebuilt by love, a partner in a profound mission, a mother watching her son's simple wisdom change the world. And Peter, nestled safely between them, his father's arms and his mother's love a fortress around him, knew only that he was home. The yellow tractor was safe in his pocket, a cherished relic of a brave man, but he no longer needed to clutch it for courage. His courage was all around him, built into the very walls of his life. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber, casting a warm, forgiving light over the new community. The story of Joseph Sanders was no longer a tale of a life ended, but a song of lives begun. The story of Henry, Teresa, and Peter was no longer one of rescue, but of a love so deep it became a sanctuary for others. They turned together, hand in hand, and walked toward the sounds of joy, leaving the podium and the speeches behind. They were not just a family, they were a living promise. And in the quiet, steadfast peace of that certainty, their story found its perfect, everlasting end. The end. Thank you all for watching. This is Mr. Papu.